In the heart of the West Bank, a story unfolded that would shake the very foundations of humanity. A story where oppression bred resistance, and resistance gave birth to courage. It was a tale of 100 Palestinian women who, in the face of unthinkable odds, stood tall against the might of an occupying force. A story that would come to be known as the Hundred Stones of Palestine. The year was 2023, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had reached a new low. The Palestinian people, weary from decades of violence and occupation, found themselves facing a new and insidious threat. The Israeli forces had begun offering bounties for the capture of Palestinian women, promising wealth and prestige to those who succeeded. These women were seen as a threat to the occupation, their very existence a symbol of resistance and hope. When the news spread throughout the West Bank, the Palestinian people were filled with a mixture of rage and fear. But it was the women who felt the full weight of this oppression, and it was the women who decided to take a stand. 100 Palestinian women from all walks of life came together to form an underground resistance movement. They met in secret, under the cover of darkness, and plotted a course of action that would change the course of history. These women were not warriors by trade, but they were mothers, daughters, and sisters who refused to let their people be torn apart. They were teachers, doctors, and shopkeepers who knew that the struggle for freedom could not be left to others. Their plan was simple, yet daring. They would form small, autonomous cells, each dedicated to a specific act of resistance. Some would forge identification papers, enabling their comrades to move freely throughout the occupied territories. Others would serve as messengers, relaying crucial information between the cells. Still, others would engage in acts of sabotage, targeting the infrastructure that supported the occupation. As the women carried out their missions, they discovered a newfound sense of purpose and unity. They were no longer just individuals, but a collective force that could not be easily broken. And as their actions began to have an impact, the Israeli forces refused to back down. They redoubled their efforts, increasing the bounties for the women and stepping up their searches. But the more the women were hunted, the more they were willing to risk. One of the most daring missions was carried out by a young woman named Layla. A gifted hacker, she had been responsible for creating the secure communication network that linked the resistance cells. But when she discovered that the Israeli forces were planning a massive crackdown on the resistance, she knew she had to act. Layla spent days hiding in an abandoned building, tapping into the Israeli military's computer systems. She stole classified documents and uncovered the locations of secret prisons where her comrades were being held. Then, she relayed this information to the other resistance cells. As the woman received Layla's message, they knew they had to act fast. They launched a series of daring raids, freeing their captured sisters from the secret prisons. But in the process, several of the women were captured or killed, becoming the very bounties that the Israeli forces had placed on their heads. Despite these setbacks, the women refused to give up. They continued to carry out their missions, each act of resistance a testament to their determination and courage. And as their actions spread throughout the West Bank, the people began to rally behind them. The Israeli forces, desperate to crush the uprising, intensified their efforts. They imposed curfews and checkpoints, attempting to isolate the resistance cells and starve them of resources. But the women were resourceful, and they continued to adapt and evolve. In one small village, a group of women led by a fierce and determined leader named Fatima organized a series of protests against the Israeli occupation. They marched through the streets, chanting slogans and waving the Palestinian flag. The Israeli forces tried to quell the protests, but the women stood their ground, refusing to back down. The protests spread throughout the West Bank, and soon the people were rising up in defiance. They joined the women in their protests, and together, they demanded an end to the occupation and the bounties that had torn their families apart. As the movement grew, the Israeli forces became increasingly desperate. They unleashed their military might on the protesters using tear gas, rubber bullets, and live ammunition. But the people did not falter. They continued to march, their voices raised in defiance. In the midst of this chaos, the women of the resistance movement redoubled their efforts. They continued to sabotage the occupation's infrastructure, disrupting supply lines and causing chaos among the Israeli forces. They also worked tirelessly to provide aid and support to the families of those who had been arrested or killed. One day, Fatima received a message that a group of Israeli soldiers was preparing to raid a school in her village. She knew that she had to act quickly to protect the children and teachers from harm. She gathered a group of her comrades, and together they devised a plan. That night, under the cover of darkness, the women crept towards the school. They hid in the shadows, waiting for the Israeli soldiers to arrive. When the soldiers entered the school, the women sprang into action. They attacked the soldiers with a barrage of stones and debris, driving them out of the school and saving the children from harm. The news of the women's bravery spread throughout the West Bank, and their actions inspired others to rise up and join the resistance. The Israeli forces, faced with a growing and determined opposition, began to lose control. In the end, it was the women's unwavering dedication to their cause that brought about change. As the resistance movement grew, the Israeli government was forced to reevaluate its strategy. The bounties on the women's heads were lifted, and negotiations began for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The Hundred Stones of Palestine, as they came to be known, had shown the world that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, courage and determination could triumph over adversity. Their legacy lived on, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for freedom and justice. And as for the women themselves, they returned to their homes and their families, their hearts filled with pride and the knowledge that they had played a role in shaping the future of their homeland.
Please subscribe to my channel Lessons of Life and press the bell notification icon.